Namaskar to all of you. High Commissioner Manpreet Vora, Consul General Manish Gupta, distinguished community leaders, personalities in various fields, dear friends. It's really a very great pleasure for me to meet you all this evening. And I meet you as I'm at the tail end of a visit to Australia. I came here day before yesterday, spent the day yesterday in Canberra, meeting my counterparts and other ministers of the government. I've spent an instructive day today with the Australian military, with the Army and the Navy. And in between, I must also tell you, I dropped by the Sydney Cricket Ground and was enormously privileged to meet Steve Waugh. So you can see it's been a good day, but you are the icing on the cake. First of all, let me say, as I do to community wherever I travel, that I bring to you the greetings of all your compatriots at home, their good wishes, their pride in your success, their continued interest in your well-being, and a lot of that I must also add featured in some form or the other in my meetings with the government. This is actually my second visit to Australia this year. I came in the first half of the year before the elections to Melbourne for the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. This was a bilateral visit, and I am very encouraged that even in the space of a few months since this government in Australia has come to power, I'm actually the sixth minister, I think, from India who's traveling out to Australia. My colleagues dealing with education, with coal and mines, with renewable energy, our Minister of State dealing with culture in my own ministry, and most recently the Jal Shakti Minister, the Water Resources Minister. They've all been here, and I think you saw some of that in the AV which was shown to you. And I mention that because I want you all to appreciate today how much of a focus there is on this relationship, the commitment in terms of time and energy and attention to it. And I would add, it's fully reciprocated on the Australian side. Very, very early on, after the government was sworn into office. In fact, our first meeting, interestingly, was at Tokyo, because we had a Quad meeting, and literally the day after this government was sworn in, Prime Minister Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong came to India, and we saw them within 24 hours of their assumption of office. We've then had the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, Richard Marles. We've had two senior leaders from these states. I think the Prime Minister of New South Wales and Premier of New South Wales, and the Deputy Premier, I think, Western Australia. And I expect this traffic to continue. Because these exchanges, in many ways, tell their own story. They speak of the change today in our relationship, and a lot of that change is about all of you. Now, in my own meetings yesterday, I met my counterpart, Penny Wong. I met the Defence Minister, Richard Marles. I also met the Education Minister, Justin Clare. And the reason I mention that is, for all of you, that would also give some sense of what are our priorities, where is our focus, because who am I meeting is an indication of really what is moving in the relationship. Now, the overall sense which I want to convey to you is really of two countries who in many ways have discovered the great potential of our ties and who have started to address that in a very serious manner. And for me, in many ways, the sort of symbolism of that, when I look back, there are two big symbols that I see. Politically, the visit of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Australia in 2014, and more recently, the economic, the trade agreement that ECTA that we concluded, and I was very pleased to see my friend and colleague Piyush Goyal's photograph on the audiovisual in that connection. Now, since this government has come to power, I'm very happy to share with you that actually the ECTA ratification process is underway, and also that some of the tax obstacles that our businesses, especially our IT businesses, that they faced, that is also, I think, on the way of being resolved. We are very confident with that by the end of this year, early next, we would really be in a position to put in place a new economic framework which will allow the full possibilities of our cooperation to unfold. But that's what is already done or what is underway. I think what is really exciting about our relationship today are the enormous possibilities that we are now looking at. And foremost among them is education. Australia has established a global reputation as an educational hub. A lot of Indian students come here. And we believe today that education can be really the avenue by which India-Australia relationship can advance in a much more expansive manner. And I say that because in India, we've also had some major changes in our education policy. That India today, for a variety of reasons, actually is seeking greater international collaboration. And we are seeking that because we want our students to be more competitive. We want our students to understand the world better. And we want our students to be prepared for a global workplace. There is understanding in India today. The era when countries primarily thought in their own space, that era is behind us. If India is to advance, if India is to take its place, you can say, the Committee of Nations, then one part of that must be really a full expression of our talents and skills, the mobility for them to make a global impact, the recognition, the recognition of their certifications and degrees. So it is that kind of world which we are today trying to prepare Indian skills for, and in that we regard Australia as a particularly important partner. So it was very appropriate that in fact the first meeting that Prime Ministers Modi and Albanese had in Tokyo, they agreed that let's put a priority on education, and Minister Dharmendra Pradhan actually came here for that purpose. And I was told by Minister Justin Clare that he intends to visit India too, and our expectation is by the time he goes, we will see some very significant progress on the education front. But there are other domains. Again, this is a world of semiconductors. You all know how important critical minerals are. So it was again no accident that the Minister of Mines, Prahlad Joshi ji was one of the early visitors here. We hope to work with Australian industry on a business-to-business basis, really to see whether in the area of mining, especially of critical minerals, whether it is possible for us to develop a stronger relationship. In addition to that, I think we're also looking at clean energy, and there too you had the minister coming in, R.K. Singh, and perhaps if there is one lesson from the energy crisis that we are all going through in the aftermath of the Ukraine conflict, it is that the transition to cleaner and greener energy needs to be hastened. And Australia is the kind of economy which in many ways can be a pioneer in some of its aspects. You would have heard our Prime Minister announcing on Independence Day a national hydrogen mission. So this too is an area where we see a lot of possibilities with Australia. On the business front, things have been reasonably good. Our trade in the year which is just completed is in excess of $27 billion. It's been quite a big jump, but again, it's not a level with which we are satisfied. We are very confident that we will be able to grow this, especially once ECTA and the tax avoidance amendments come into play. There are some issues which naturally as a community you would be interested. One of them is visas. And I want to tell you that it was something which I took up with different ministers when I was in Canberra. We have a particular problem that students are facing, and I was assured that there's in fact already an improvement in that regard, that from I think about 60,000 students today, there are 77,000 Indian students back in this country, but you all know that the numbers should be and could be much higher. And I was assured that by the end of the year, the visa backlog, particularly in respect to students, would be cleared. It's not just students, because there's a community, there are also family reasons for people to travel. I think there is an appreciation today on the importance of resuming tourism in a big way. So we certainly hope that one of the big disruptions of the COVID era, that we will be able to put behind us in the coming year. If I were to look beyond the immediate, there are two issues which we believe would be transformative for this relationship. One is a partnership on mobility. Now that really means that Indians with skills and talents that are in demand in Australia will have a legal framework, an agreed methodology by which they move from one country to another. Now, India is reaching such agreements with a lot of countries. We have got this in place with Japan, with UK, with France. We are close to concluding one with Germany. I think we've done some preliminary work in this with Australia. So I'm very much hoping that that is one area where we can see rapid progress, because we know that in many domains there are skill shortages in Australia. So there is a mismatch today in the world where the economic activity is and where is the skill to support that economic activity. And part of diplomacy today is how do you bring those two, that mismatch, how do you sort it out? If people are moving from one country to another, from one economy to the other, is the issue of mutual recognition of degrees and qualifications. So that too is something which we are working on. I'm sure that as the Indian community, all of you, whether it's your business, whether it is the organizations you work in, you will be interested and you will certainly be welcoming of the possibility that there is today a determination on both sides really to create an atmosphere and, more important, a set of mechanisms for the mobility of Indians to and from Australia. There was also an interest reiterated during my visit for Australia to open a consulate in Bengaluru. It is something which we look forward to, and I very much hope that we too will be able to open additional consulates in Australia in the near future. And that, I think, is also something which is a very practical point of interest for the community. Moving on, I shared with you that I spent some time today, in fact much of the day today, with the Australian military. They are a very important partner for us today in terms of the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific. In fact, one of the big changes in our relationship, the fact that today we are both members of the Quad mechanism, and our working together in many ways ensures that this region remains free, remains open, remains stable, remains prosperous. And I have seen again, even in the last year, how much progress we have made. Just in the last few weeks, we've had two major exercises in Australia where the Indian military has participated. I think we've just had the naval chiefs visit a few weeks ago. So the perception, the relevance of each country to the other, and our common shared ability to contribute to the betterment of the region, I think that too is something which is today an important factor in the relationship. So since I was meeting the community, I thought it's very important I share with you, what has happened in the relationship. But I want to say a few words to you about what is happening in India. And I say this to you as someone who is very deeply involved in the policy making in India, who travels a reasonable amount in India, and I meet people often, not just dealing with foreign affairs, but students, professionals, people on the field in various professions. Every country in the world has gone through a tough time in the last 3 years. There's no country, not one, which has not been deeply affected by the COVID. Today, what is important is which country is coming out of COVID in a better way, in a faster way, having learned the lessons of it, having used that period really to reassess itself and to reinvent itself and prepare for a post-COVID world. And the central point I want to share with you today is that India, which suffered so much during the COVID, and all of you have friends and relatives, you would have seen it, many of you contributed in different ways, especially during the Delta wave, to the medical efforts in India. All of you should be reassured that India is today very strongly on a recovery path. Now, I say this to you because perhaps more than most Indians, and probably more than most of you, I travel. It's my job, okay? And I like my job, I do it enthusiastically. So I travel a lot, and it gives me an opportunity to assess how different countries have dealt with COVID and how are they facing the world today. Now, we have dealt with the COVID with a great deal of determination, with a lot of fortitude, but also with a vision and in many ways with a great deal of foresight. This period has first of all seen a massive upgrade in India's health infrastructure. That what normally perhaps would have taken us a decade to do actually happened because of the COVID in a matter of a few months. So if you travel across the country, For example, I'm a member of parliament from Gujarat. I look at that particular district for which I have a responsibility. And I see the changes in the hospitals of that district. It's really impressive. The second big change in India is digital. We spoke about digital, people thought of it as having possibilities. Today, those possibilities have happened in India. That we are able to deliver public services in India on a scale which you cannot even imagine. And it is happening only because we have today the digital backbone and the leadership, the Prime Minister's vision on how to apply technology tools for better governance, for good governance. That is today yielding results on the ground. So you had, if you remember during COVID, predictions that, all sorts of things would happen in India. And perhaps those predictions, all of them were not made with an ill intent. I mean, people just looked at the scale of the the lockdown, the consequences of the lockdown, and asked themselves, how is this big society going to get through this? And it got through it because one of the central planks of our COVID response was to ensure that unlike 100 years ago, when Spanish flu came, where more people died of hunger than they did of the flu, this time around, nobody will die of hunger. So the delivery of food, of rations on a scale that 60% of the country's population, 800 million people, actually for more than 2 years have been getting from the government free rations. Out of them, half of them are also getting payments in the bank for their daily necessities. And if you ask yourself, how did that happen? Please think back in the first years of Prime Minister Modi's government, that you actually had a campaign to get people to open bank accounts, to get people to open bank accounts without money if necessary. And a lot of people didn't understand what that was about. When COVID hit us, the fact that almost everybody had access to banking meant government had access to everybody's welfare. That we could transfer money. Now, can you imagine in the old days if the banking wasn't there and you would have sent out money, you would know that story of how much leaves and how much reaches. Okay? So, the point I make to you is, every government in the world, they naturally did their best. What is the best response? How can they most effectively stabilize their society? And many governments actually spent huge amounts of money, often giving money to enterprises, in the expectation enterprises would pass it down, would look after their employees, would continue activities which would be good for the economy. In the case of India, we actually were both effective and prudent in the manner in which we responded. We didn't, we were very, very responsible with our financial spending, but we made sure that what we spent actually went out there to the people. But it isn't only the COVID, where the digital public delivery has been effective. If you travel today in India, and I encourage you to do so, go to smaller towns, go to the villages, look at the big schemes today which are happening in India. Schemes, some of them you would have heard of. You would have, I think perhaps a very well-known scheme is the replacement of firewood with gas, cooking gas. Look at the scale of that scheme. You actually have 90 million beneficiaries, 90, 3.5 times the population of this country. If you look today at home ownership programs, there are two. There's the government supported home ownership programs in towns and in villages. In the last few years, because there is today a digital backbone where the beneficiaries are identified, they are known, they are certified, they are monitored. We actually have done almost 25 million homes delivered. That if you look at there's a health cover, health insurance today. We are looking, today a government scheme like health insurance is doing hundreds of millions. There's a pension, there's a pension scheme and financial scheme, multiple schemes. You put them together, you're again talking, something like 350, 400 million people. So what I want to impress on all of you is that India, which you may have visited before the COVID, or which you would have known perhaps from the time you left India, that India is today a very different India. That we have come through COVID, and I recognize fully this was a traumatic experience for everybody. But we have come through a traumatic experience, not simply scarred by it. We have come through it with different learning, with a great determination, with an enormous experience, with the ability to show to our population that a once-in-a-century event can be tackled if you have good governance, if you have strong leadership, if you have the support and the good wishes of the people. And so a lot of these very, I would say, overdrawn, this very apocalyptic scenarios कि भाई पता नहीं क्या होगा, लोग घर जाएंगे, उनकी नौकरी से एक बार निकल जाएं तो how do they survive? Now all that, we have actually disproven that. So one part of the change today in India is this delivery on the ground, this good governance on the ground. The other part of it is also the vision of the Prime Minister that we have to become a modern, developed nation in the next quarter century. Now you will ask yourself, what does that mean? It actually means almost everything. It means better infrastructure. It means better human resources. It means investing, in people in different ways. It means dealing with health. It means correcting gender discrimination and gender imbalance. So if you again look at the range, the broad range of transformations underway, it's not a single process. Take any part of your interest of human life. Something is changing out there. And these changes are all in many ways self-supporting. If you have a change in skill policy and education, it is also matched by a new startup policy, innovation policy. It is done by greater support to businesses, especially small and medium enterprises. It is done by further advanced by actually promoting exports. So one leads to the other, and that cascading impact today is visible in India in different fields. So what I would today leave you with is really this message, that our country has come through a test like everybody else, but we have come through it with a great deal of, I would say, a great deal of resolve, but have also utilized this period to bring about very major changes in India. Those changes in India today position us very much better for what we can do ahead of us. And that in all of this, you will see an India which will be much more connected to the world, which will be much more relevant to the world. If you look at the last year alone, our exports are the highest ever. Not, today still countries are saying, can I get back to my export level before COVID? We are not talking before COVID, we are talking highest ever. And it's not, again, a number with which we are satisfied. You will see an India which will really look at the world with greater confidence, which will engage much more, which in different fields, many of which are, where Australia also has an interest, which will be active, which will also fulfill its global responsibilities. That on the big issues of the day, it can be climate change. I mean, you all live here, you have seen this year, I'm told, is one of your wettest. In India too, it's been hottest, coldest, wettest, driest, depending on which part of India you live. So on the big issues of the day, it could be climate change, it could be terrorism, it could be pandemic. I mean, if you look at what we have done in the case of pandemic, even in this region, there are countries, many of the Pacific Islands, actually 3 of them got vaccines from India. And I think 5 or 6 more actually got their medical supplies and medical equipment from India. So it is a country whose global footprint will increase. But in all of this, we obviously look for good partners, reliable partners, comfortable partners. Australia today would surely be among those. But to advance all of this, we ultimately need your support. I think the ambassador put it very well when he said he's the High Commissioner, but you're all the ambassadors. And a foreign minister, the more ambassadors you have, the better. The better it is, the easier my job. But I want to impress on you that having done this for now more than 40 years, 45 years, I have seen how our reputation across the world has changed, how relationships have changed because reputations have changed. Ultimately, people in other countries judge India by Indians. For them, a country is something distant. It has a meaning when they put a face to it, when they put a relationship to it. When for them it is associated, I've heard this in some other countries where I have lived and worked. Somebody comes and says, my doctor is an Indian, my chartered accountant is an Indian, my teacher is an Indian, or the person who my child looks after is an Indian. So ultimately, this is all about people, it is about faces, it is about relationships, it is about reputation. And your efforts really build the image of India in this country. And I would say, just as the High Commissioner mentioned, I have only heard praise for it here, but it is one I would say area where I'm never complacent. I think it's very important as a community that we display our, we are a diverse people, we are a very diverse society. But it's very important we send a clear message of unity also within the community. So I'm counting on all of you. I'm really, as you can see, the fact that I'm here for the second time tells you how much I'm myself invested in this relationship. It is one on which I have great expectations. And I know that my optimism about it is also equally shared on the Australian side. Once again, I want to thank you all for everything you're doing. And I would conclude by reiterating my hope that through your endeavors, you will make my job of building this relationship that much easier. Thank you very much.